I used to work as a custodian during the night shift, and for the first few months, it felt like the perfect job. No kids racing through the hallways, no teachers nagging for last-minute favors, no constant noise, just silence. At first, I welcomed it. The echo of my footsteps across polished tiles, the hum of fluorescent lights, and the creak of the old building felt manageable, even comforting. But with time, the silence became something else. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It was oppressive, as if the building itself was alive and listening. Doors clicked shut when no one touched them. Lockers popped open like they were being tugged from the inside, and pipes groaned like hidden voices whispering in the walls. It was the kind of quiet that made your stomach tighten and your imagination turn every shadow into a figure. People joked that schools are only alive when filled with students, but at night, my shift always started at 10 p.m., when the building was officially empty. The buses were long gone, the classrooms dark, and the echo of the last teacher's footsteps had faded hours before. As I clocked in and pushed my cleaning cart down the deserted halls, the school felt like a completely different place from the one I saw during the day. At night, it wasn't a school. It was a shell, a concrete maze filled with echoes that didn't belong to me. The sound of my keys jingling seemed unnaturally loud, and sometimes I swore I could hear other footsteps overlapping mine. I tried to ignore the feeling, telling myself it was just nerves. Still, each night I felt the same creeping unease the moment the last set of lights dimmed and the doors locked behind me. I wasn't alone, not really. But whoever, or whatever, shared that building with me didn't belong there. When I first started, one of the older custodians gave me a piece of advice. Don't go down into the basement unless you have to. He chuckled as he said it, but there was a weight in his eyes that told me he wasn't entirely joking. He mentioned the basement smelled of damp earth, that the lights never worked right, and that everyone who had worked nights avoided it when possible. He even threw in a little jab about it being haunted, the kind of remark meant to make a newbie uneasy. I laughed along, brushing it off, but that laugh was hollow. Even before I ever stepped foot down there, I felt something strange about that door at the far end of the hall. Every time I wheeled past it, I'd feel a chill crawl across my neck. I told myself it was just imagination, but the way the older guy had spoken, half joking and half serious, planted a seed in my mind that grew into dread. For months, I avoided the basement with no problem. My assigned tasks kept me upstairs, polishing floors, emptying trash, and cleaning bathrooms. But even then, the basement door had a presence. It was heavy steel, chipped with decades of paint, and sat in a shadowed corner of the hallway, like a mouth waiting to swallow anyone foolish enough to open it. Some nights, as I mopped near it, I would hear faint noises beneath the floor, thuds, creaks, and sometimes what sounded like footsteps pacing in circles far below me. I told myself the old building was settling, that pipes and boilers made plenty of weird sounds. Still, the idea of actually opening that door always made my palms sweat. It became a kind of silent ritual. I'd pass the door quickly, eyes forward, heart racing. That door wasn't just wood and steel. It felt like a threshold. One night, 2 years into the job, I finally had no choice. A note taped to my cleaning cart listed tasks, and one of them was to retrieve folding chairs for an event the next morning. I knew instantly where they were stored: the basement. I stood staring at that door for a long minute, debating whether I could stall or lie to my supervisor. But pride pushed me forward. With my flashlight in hand, I turned the handle. The stairwell groaned as I stepped inside. My boots echoed unnaturally loud, like the walls were amplifying every sound. The air grew heavier the further I went down, damp and musty, smelling of wet cement and mold. When I flipped the switch at the bottom, only a few of the overhead bulbs flickered weakly to life. The rest of the long hallway stretched into darkness. It felt like I had stepped out of the school and into another world, one where I didn't belong. The folding chairs were supposed to be in the second storage room on the left. The first door I passed led to a room filled, wall to ceiling, with broken desks, stacked like corpses in a mass grave. The second door's rusted hinges screamed when I pulled it open. The stench of dust and stale wood hit me. Inside, uneven stacks of chairs leaned against the wall, like they were waiting for me. I bent down, grabbing as many as I could carry, when I froze. A faint sound slid through the hallway, something dragging, slow and deliberate, like a shoe scuffing along the floor. My pulse spiked. I held my breath, listening. The sound stopped. Carefully, I poked my head out and swept the flashlight across the corridor. Empty concrete. Nothing moved, but the silence pressed down on me like a weight. I whispered to myself it was the pipes, maybe even a rat. On my way back toward the stairwell, I felt it, a sudden, icy gust against my face. I froze mid-step. The basement was sealed. No windows, no air circulation. The air was always warm and stale, not freezing. Yet this draft felt sharp, like the air from an open freezer. My flashlight beam shook as I scanned the corridor, but nothing had changed. Shadows clung to the corners, and the buzzing of the failing lights seemed louder. My breath fogged faintly, and then the cold was gone. Shaken, I dropped the chairs at the bottom of the stairs before heading back for another load. When I returned, my stomach sank. The stack of chairs looked wrong. They were leaning differently, shifted somehow. I stared for a long moment, trying to recall exactly how I had left them. I told myself I was imagining things, paranoia feeding on nerves. But deep down, I already knew something in that basement wasn't staying still. As I lifted the second stack of chairs, the sound returned, a thump, followed by a dragging scrape farther down the hallway. My flashlight jerked toward the noise, and that's when I saw it. 20 feet away, one of the classroom doors that should have been locked shut was cracked open. My stomach dropped. I knew I hadn't touched it. Every room in the basement was supposed to be secured, no exceptions. That narrow opening, just wide enough for someone to peek through, made my throat go dry. Every instinct screamed at me to run upstairs and leave everything behind, but I couldn't move. My legs felt rooted in place, like the building itself wanted me to stay. I forced myself forward, step by cautious step, whispering excuses in my head. Maybe the latch was weak. Maybe air pressure shifted it. Anything but what I really felt. That someone I reached the cracked door and forced myself to speak. "Hello? Anyone down here?" My voice cracked, echoing off the bare concrete walls, sounding too small, too fragile. No reply. My hand trembled as I shoved the door open and swept my flashlight inside. The beam revealed shelves of dusty science equipment, boxes stacked to the ceiling, and cobwebs thick in the corners. Nothing moved. I stepped in cautiously, the dust crunching under my boots. That's when I heard it again, a dragging shuffle, but this time it came from behind me in the hallway. My chest seized. I spun so fast, the flashlight nearly slipped from my hand. The beam shot down the corridor. Shadows, pipes, and cracked paint. Nothing else. But I could feel it. That pressure, the undeniable sense of being watched, of eyes fixed on me. My skin crawled, every hair rising, and I knew I had to get out before whatever was behind me decided to show itself. I backed out of the classroom slowly, never lowering the flashlight. Each step echoed like thunder in the silence. I told myself not to run, but when I reached the stairwell and saw the stack of chairs waiting, instinct took over. I grabbed as many as I could and bolted, taking the steps 2 at a time. My lungs burned, and sweat poured down my back despite the basement's chill. When I burst through the door into the main hallway upstairs, the school felt alive with safety, as if the terror below couldn't follow. I slammed the stairwell door shut and locked it, even though I wasn't supposed to. Leaning against the wall, gasping, I tried convincing myself I'd imagined everything. Pipes, rats, air pressure, anything logical. But logic couldn't explain the cold draft, the shifting chairs, or that cracked door. And most of all, it couldn't explain the sound of slow, dragging. A week later, I was mopping directly above the basement stairs when it happened again. At first, just silence. Then, bang, a deep, hollow thud that rattled the tiles under my feet. Bang, the mop slipped from my hands. Bang, 3 times, evenly spaced, like someone was hammering their fist against the concrete wall below. My blood ran cold. I gripped the mop handle like a weapon, staring at the stairwell door. Then, as if answering the bangs, the door itself rattled violently, shaking in its frame, as if someone, or something, was shoving it from the other side. I couldn't move. I stood frozen, every muscle locked. The rattling stopped, leaving only silence. But my heart didn't slow. I backed away step by shaky step, refusing to turn my back on that door. From that night on, I made a silent vow. I would never go into the... After that night, I worked differently. Whenever tasks required anything from the basement, I made excuses, stalled until another custodian was nearby, or simply refused. I didn't tell anyone exactly why. If I had, they would have laughed, chalking it up to nerves or imagination. But I knew better. I'd felt the weight of its presence, the cold draft of unseen movement, the watchful eyes in the dark. Some of the older custodians might have understood. They had their own stories, half jokes about voices in the halls, footsteps that didn't match their own. But no one admitted to being truly afraid. I did. Every night shift after that, I avoided that stairwell like it was a wound in the building. It was easier to mop faster, sweep corners twice, or even skip tasks than to risk going down there. Some part of me believed the basement was patient. A year later, I switched schools, thinking maybe the unease would fade. The new job was at a sprawling high school, 4 floors and 2 gyms. The place was bigger, older, and even more labyrinthine. And once again, I was stuck with the overnight shift. The rules were simple. Go room by room, floor by floor, turn off lights, lock doors, empty trash. It usually took the entire night to finish. But being alone in that giant building felt worse than the middle school. Shadows stretched unnaturally in flickering hallways. Old lockers clicked open randomly, and certain areas, like the unused 3rd floor, always felt colder, quieter, almost abandoned. I told myself it was just my nerves from the old job carrying over. But as the nights went on, the feeling grew. Different building, same dread. One Friday night, I had to work completely alone after another custodian called out sick. Normally, we worked in pairs, so the building felt emptier than ever. Around midnight, I climbed to the 3rd floor. That floor was rarely used. Most classrooms locked, some abandoned, filled with old books, broken desks, or dusty lab equipment. The silence up there was oppressive. Even my footsteps seemed muffled. As I mopped down the long hallway, I noticed a classroom door, about 20 feet ahead, was open. My stomach tightened. I had checked all the rooms earlier, and every door had been locked. Slowly, I set the mop aside and approached. The wooden door creaked when I pushed it open. Inside, the desks were stacked neatly along the walls, boxes piled in the corners. Nothing looked out of place, except one box. It had been dragged slightly. Scuff marks streaked across the floor. My chest tightened. I shut the door quickly and returned to my mop, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But when I passed the room again, minutes later, my blood froze. The door now stood wide open. The box that had been against the wall was sitting in the center of the room. My pulse hammered in my ears. I whispered, "Hello, who's in here?" My voice echoed softly, fragile against the stillness. Silence answered, until I heard it. From the back of the room, slow, heavy breathing. It wasn't the building. It wasn't pipes. It was a person, or something close enough. My throat closed, and I slammed the door shut before sprinting down the hall to the stairwell. I pressed against the cold metal, chest heaving. Logic failed me. Every door was locked, every window secured. No one should have been inside. But the sound was undeniable. Slow, deliberate breaths meant for me to hear. My hands shook as I dialed my supervisor, whispering into the phone what had happened. He told me to wait, that he'd be there in 20 minutes. Those 20 minutes felt like hours. I stayed as far from that hallway as possible, staring over my shoulder every few seconds, expecting the classroom door to open again. When he finally arrived, armed with a heavy flashlight, I felt a wave of relief. Together, we entered the classroom. The box was still in the middle of the floor, but no one was inside. We checked behind desks, in closets, even under furniture. Nothing. He suggested I was tired, imagining things, but I knew what I'd heard. That breathing wasn't imagination. It was too real, too deliberate. I stayed silent, nodding like I agreed. But deep down, I was certain. Whatever had been in that room had chosen to reveal itself only to me, and it had no intention of letting me forget it. At my next school, the place that haunted me wasn't the basement or an old classroom. It was the auditorium. Massive, with 3 levels of seating and a stage draped in heavy curtains. It looked normal during the day, but at night, it transformed. Even with the lights on, shadows pooled unnaturally in corners. Echoes stretched too long, distorting the smallest sound. I saved it for last on my cleaning rounds, because I hated going in there. One winter night, I had to clean it early for a play scheduled the next morning. The moment I stepped inside, dragging my cart behind me, the heavy door slammed shut, and the echo rippled across the empty seats. I began sweeping the aisles, the scrape of my broom amplified unnaturally. Then, faint at first, I heard it. Footsteps on the stage, slow, deliberate, pacing across the boards. I froze, staring at the empty platform. Every muscle in my body, I forced myself onto the stage, sweeping my flashlight behind the curtains. Dust floated in the beam. Ropes and pulleys creaked faintly, but nothing moved. I backed off quickly, convincing myself it was my imagination. But as I returned to the aisles, I caught movement. A shadow flickering across the balcony. My chest tightened. Then came the whisper. Low at first, indistinct, then clearer. My name, drawn out, deliberate, like someone was standing just behind me. I spun so fast, the flashlight slipped in my hands. Empty stage, empty seats, nothing. Yet the whisper clung to the air. Panic surged, and I bolted for the side door. As I pulled it open, the night air rushed in. But above me, echoing faintly from the balcony, came footsteps, pacing back and forth. I slammed the door behind me, heart racing. People later said a teacher had died in that auditorium, still haunting it.